On Saturday afternoon, Donald Trump published a 400-word ramble on Truth Social, demanding that his, quote, boys, and in some cases gals, stop wasting time and energy on Jeffrey Epstein, somebody that nobody cares about, and to let Pam Bondi do her job. Unsurprisingly, this backfired, and now even the mainstream media's attention is focused on the so-called Epstein files, and the upset that this has caused in the MAGA universe. So in this video, we're going to take a look at how Jeffrey Epstein became a genuine problem for Trump, and what might happen next. Let's start with a quick recap. We're not going to spend too long talking about who Jeffrey Epstein is or what he did, because, well, that's a whole rabbit hole in itself. And this video is mainly about why that has suddenly become a political problem for Trump. But the TLDR is that Epstein was an American financier and convicted sex offender. The Epstein story really kicked off in 2018 when the Miami Herald published a series of pieces titled Perversion of Justice, accusing Epstein of abusing more than 60 women over the preceding 2 decades, and drew attention to a secret plea deal he negotiated with the FBI in 2008, which allowed him to avoid federal charges related to the sex trafficking of minors, despite significant evidence against him. Anyway, the Miami Herald story drew a fair bit of attention, both because it was happening in the context of Me Too, and because it transpired that Epstein had connections to an extraordinary number of high-profile Americans. Then, in July 2019, Epstein was arrested on federal charges of sex trafficking minors, but he died in his cell a month later in August. The Bureau of Prisons and the New York City Medical Examiner's Office claimed that he had committed suicide by hanging. While Trump's then Attorney General William Barr originally expressed some skepticism and ordered an investigation into Epstein's death, in November he claimed that Epstein had indeed died by suicide, citing a, quote, perfect storm of screw-ups. Now, believing that Epstein didn't kill himself is often described as a conspiracy theory, but it's worth noting that most Americans doubt the official narrative. Polling generally finds that roughly 20% of Americans think that Epstein killed himself, while about 40% think that he was murdered, and the remaining 40% are unsure. And, well, you can sort of see why. Cameras around Epstein's cell apparently malfunctioned just around his time of death. The 2 guards who were supposed to be on suicide watch failed to check his cell and falsified records to imply otherwise, and his lawyers and brother claimed that there was no indication that Epstein was suicidal. This led to a widespread suspicion of a cover-up, presumably organised by powerful individuals with links to Epstein. And since then, there's been reoccurring calls from the Joe Rogan side of the internet, sometimes called the Rogan sphere, to, quote, release the Epstein files. These sorts of voters generally backed Trump during the election, and during an interview with Fox News last year, Trump was asked whether he'd declassify any federal government files related to Epstein, 9/11, and the JFK assassination. He said that he would, although he caveated that he was less enthusiastic about releasing the Epstein files than the other ones, because, quote, you don't want to affect people's lives if it's phony stuff in there. Nonetheless, this was widely interpreted by his base as a promise that he'd release all of the federal documents, and, well, originally it looked like this might actually happen. Trump appointed Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, who had both previously questioned the official Epstein narrative, as FBI director and deputy director respectively. And in February, Trump's Attorney General Pam Bondi told Fox News that the Epstein client list was, quote, sitting on my desk. A few weeks later, Bondi distributed binders titled Epstein Files Phase 1 to a handful of MAGA-aligned influencers, but there wasn't much new information in them. Nonetheless, the Trump administration signaled that they were done talking about Epstein, and White House Press Secretary Catherine Leavitt said in May that she had no specific timeline for releasing further Epstein files. Despite some irritation from the Rogan sphere and MAGA universe, which ticked up again in June when Elon Musk claimed in a now deleted post on X that Trump was in the Epstein files, it didn't look like this was going to become a major issue for Trump. Because, well, Epstein isn't really the median voter's top priority, and it was mainly a talking point on online MAGA circles. However, in the past week or so, this has apparently changed. The story escalated on July 7th, when despite Pam Bondi's comments in February about the client list being, quote, on her desk, the Department of Justice and FBI published a short memo claiming that there was no incriminating list of clients and no credible evidence that Epstein blackmailed prominent individuals. This triggered a backlash in the MAGA universe, but it's since erupted into the open and is now a headline story in the mainstream media. There are at least two reasons this story snowballed. The first is the Streisand effect. The more Trump tells people not to talk about it, the more they do. Trump's efforts to deflect away from the story have backfired spectacularly. Last week, he had to go at a reporter for, quote, wasting time with a question on Epstein before that now infamous post on Truth Social over the weekend. As you can see from this Google Trends data, every time he talks about Epstein, interest in the story, and specifically Trump's relationship with Epstein, skyrockets. Secondly, Democrats, including Jon Ossoff and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, have jumped on the story, adding fuel to the fire. Previously, Democrats didn't want to talk about Epstein, both because they were worried that platforming this sort of story would make them look conspiratorial, and because they didn't think there was anything to be gained from it. However, Trump clearly doesn't like talking about it, and his apparent discomfort has sparked some speculation that there might actually be something incriminating in there. So at least some Democrats have decided that talking about Epstein is worth the reputational risk for the harm it causes to Trump. Democrats are also trying to exacerbate a divide between the Trump administration and its MAGA base, which clearly feels betrayed by Trump's apparent U-turn. This was made overwhelmingly apparent in last week's Turning Point USA conference, where MAGA figures like Megyn Kelly, Charlie Kirk, and Tucker Carlson all speculated that not only was the administration hiding the Epstein files, but even that Epstein was actually an Israeli intelligence agent. Clearly, this has become a problem for Trump, not just because most of the mainstream media is now speculating about his apparent relationship with Epstein, but also because it's done immense damage to the relationship between his administration and the MAGA base, who have been the energetic basis of his recent campaigns. All in all, it does feel like America is on shaky ground at the moment, with it increasingly feeling like the country's influence, popularity, and dominance are on the decline. So in the next issue of our magazine, Too Long, we're discussing this shift, and the potential that we're currently observing the end of the American order. In that section of the magazine, we discuss our thoughts on everything from the collapse of democratic norms to if America is losing allies, and if the country can maintain its dominance in energy and tech, before discussing who could potentially take over in a post-American world. So if you want to find out what we really think about America, now's your chance. It's not just the US either though. This issue is our longest ever at 78 pages. So we also get into stories like why El Salvador and Kosovo are becoming the world's penal colonies, if the UK is lacking vision at the moment, if Europe can really defend itself, and why leaders like Putin and Netanyahu seem to be getting away with it. Plus, we also have a full interview with Professor James Kerr-Lindsay, who you might also know from YouTube, all about the collapse of the global order. Now, if that all sounds good to you, but you'd rather listen than read along, then you should check out the premium edition. Because anyone who buys a premium edition of our magazine also gets access to our recordings of selected articles. Plus, you also get access to the full 90-minute interview with James Kerr-Lindsay. On top of that, premium subscribers also get access to our behind-the-scenes podcast, The Bullpen. Regardless of whether you opt for the regular or premium edition, if you never want to miss an issue, then make sure you subscribe to Too Long, which gets you 20% off every copy as long as you stay subscribed. Plus, this week only, if you use the code BESTOFFER when signing up for a subscription, you'll get an additional 35% off. That brings down the cost as low as £5.20, or a wild 48% off. That is the best offer we are ever going to offer. So pre-order your copy today to get yourself that extra content and support all of the journalism we do here at TLDR every single day.